So welcome everyone to our session today with Adrian Rosenkranz, who is the COO of Salesforce Essentials. Adrian is here to share his expert insights to help you with everything you need to know about customer acquisition. So how to acquire your customers, how to get them to work with you, and how to keep them happy in the long term. Adrian is the COO of Salesforce Essentials and is a boots on the ground kind of leader, which is evident in everything he does. He graduated at the top of his class at Stanford and also served as the kicker for the Stanford football team under Coach Jim Harbaugh, who taught Adrian how to apply rigor to every aspect of his world. After graduating, he joined Salesforce as an intern, and the internship led to a full-time position, which led to strategic roles in an acquired company, sales and ops and marketing, before eventually being named COO. So he's really got a lot of great insights and great experience. Adrian, I'd love for you to share just a little bit about yourself and what you do right now at Salesforce Essentials.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm excited to be here. As you kind of mentioned, I'm COO of Salesforce Essentials. So what Salesforce Essentials is a startup inside of Salesforce. So we decided about a year ago to create a specific solution for small businesses designed to help them grow. And we created a individual business unit, meaning we basically have all the different pieces of a startup inside and kind of incubate it to be able to deliver innovation specifically to help the small business owner, solopreneur, entrepreneur grow their business.
Great. Just as a quick FYI, this session is brought to you by Alice, which is a free online platform to help you launch and grow your business. And you can join at helloalice.com for resources, opportunities, and exciting events such as this one, where you'll get to ask experts your questions directly. So at any time during this session, please feel free to drop in questions for Adrian into the Q&A feature you'll see at the bottom of your screen or into the chat box. So we'll be opening that up all for audience questions at the end, but as you have them, just drop them in and we'll work those in. So Adrian, let's get started here. The first question I'd like to kick us off with is, what are some of the steps you use to identify a customer?
Yeah, and I think this question really makes me think of how you differentiate your product and what your offering is. And so there's kind of questions I like to ask to kind of help guide that thought process. So one is, is your product a pre-existing category of something that already exists? Is there already demand out there that people are kind of looking for something in this product category? A quick way to do that is to use Google search tools and keyword tools to quickly look and see, okay, how many people are searching for this category? And sometimes it's a little finicky because the words you use might be different than the way that your customers are searching. But I would first try to understand that. And really understand whether that is something that there's already demand for or not. And as you think about it, there's also the other piece about this, which is then if there is a pre-existing category or not, you then either have to understand how to differentiate against what they're already using if it's existing already. And if it's not, then it becomes more of a question of how do you make sure that they understand what you're offering. And so I would look at it from that perspective and then start to connect all those things into kind of how your interviews of who your product's for and be able to differentiate that. And especially if someone has looked at your product and said, hey, I don't want that, that's a great person to understand from why not, what is it that they didn't see the difference between my products and something else. And so when you think about identifying your customers and understanding how you can better differentiate who the best fit is, it's oftentimes really great to create focus and understand what they're looking for already.
Great. So I'd love to back it up even more and talk a little bit about the customer journey. So a customer journey map is commonly thought of as the stages a customer takes from awareness of the product to consideration to purchase. and then to actually using the product and establishing loyalty. But each business's customer journeys look a little different, right? So I'd love for you to walk us through, what does the Salesforce Essentials customer journey map look like?
Yeah, and so I think you hit something that's really important, which is when you think about the customer journey and establishing the loyalty and going through all these steps, it comes down to the customer experience. And the customer experience is super important. And so as you think about from the time they come to you or looking for either a solve to a problem they have, or they're looking to, you know, find some sort of gain, it starts from there where they're just trying to get educated on how to either solve their problem or potentially grow their business in some way, or achieve some sort of gain. And from there, when we think about our customer journey map here, it's kind of going through a couple different processes. So you have the awareness that then gives them either insight into how they might solve their problem, how they might gain, goes into then the solution for that, which is the product. They then have to decide whether that actually solves their problem. Then they might choose to buy the product. And from there, that's just the beginning, because the most important part is getting started or adopting that. And once they started to adopt that, then it kind of starts moving into the next pieces, which is basically like, okay, great, they're adopting it, but is there something that's breaking? Are they learning continually? Are they getting better at using this product? Are they seeing the growth? And then ultimately, if you are a subscription, then are they renewing? Or if you're not a subscription, are they purchasing more over and over again? And I think those are the kind of the steps that we break it into. And then we subdivide that into a lot of little moments in which people may or may not come back to us again to help them, depending on how that experience is.
Right. So it's crucial that their experience is positive at every single step of that map and that journey.
Exactly.
So
and,
then
and the only thing I'll add to that is, like, an example is if any of you have taken a ride share, let's say in the last 30 days, think about that experience, right? And if I asked all of you to tell me, like, okay, in the last 30 to 90 days, have you had a bad ride share experience? Most people will nod their heads and say, yeah. And when I ask why, they'll say, oh, it was smelly or bad directions or something of the sort. When I say ask the question to you, okay, how much was the price of that? Most people say, I don't remember. And that's because the experience is becoming even more important than just the product interaction, which might be the app you use, but the experience and the product are all part of the same piece. So you have to start thinking about it end to end in terms of the experience you're getting and how they're interacting with your company, because that's actually has become just as the specific product offering you have itself.
Right. So how do you collect that feedback when you're trying to figure out if your customers are enjoying Salesforce Essentials or the different parts of the journey? How are you collecting that?
Yeah, and I think so. When you think about collecting the feedback, it's all about how do you get something that's actually actionable. And so there's different steps in this process where, as you think about, there's the simple things, which is for us, we have a technology product. And so in the product, you can give us feedback. There's when you interact with someone on our team, you can provide to us a CSAT. And so we know what the quality of those interactions if we're solving those problems. And then what's interesting too is that you will also do some kind of qualitative or subjective testing, just talking to your customers, getting a sense what's going on. And then I'm a big proponent of also having other metrics that help you really understand what's happening based on these kind of ripple effects. So the example I'll give you in my world, in technology, I'm looking at the daily active user. So people logging in, maybe it's weekly active, maybe it's monthly active. And so one of the ways we can understand that is if you start to see, okay, great, after these types of experience, are people coming into the product every day? Are we creating the right type of output that down the road, they still come back every day and we solve their problems? And I think the thing to think about is that the customer experience starts from the beginning. So even before they're in the product, it's almost as if, the first person who talks to them, or if no one's talking to them and it's really like a website or maybe it's social, those interactions are the beginning of how they view you and how they view how you can help them. And so it's really critical to find ways to assess all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So for, let's say, a solo entrepreneur, new founder, what would you recommend that they do to get to know their customers?
Yeah. So I think that when I think about how you get to know the customers, it really depends on where you are at in terms of how many customers you have. So the first thing I'll say is if you don't have customers yet, and you're really early on in that cycle, I think that's where you just want to talk to different folks because you're trying to find that product market fit.
Mm-hmm.
If you start to have customers, and depending if you're B2B or B2C, if you're B2B and you have a sales team, one of the quickest ways to get feedback is from the sales team, and really they basically can become the folks that give you the answers you might be looking for at the onset. Because they're talking to them, hearing things and hearing trends, but more importantly, it might be even better to just listen to the calls. And sometimes if you're early enough on, you might not have a sales team. And as the founder, you're doing the sales yourself. And so just seeking to understand before seeking to be understood is really important. Prior to giving the pitch, it's about understanding what they're looking for, especially as you're trying to, if you don't have a sales team yet and you're kind of the founder who's doing the sales pitch, it's really important to understand how folks are what they're even taking the meeting for, or why they're talking to you, or why they're looking at your product, so you can better understand that, because you're trying to find that product market fit, and it's going to change a bunch of times. And so you may need to change your solution based on what you're hearing. And then from there, you can kind of come back with a pitch once you understand their pain points.
That's great. Great advice. Yeah, I think a lot of people's first instincts, who might not have a lot of experience with sales, is to get right into the pitch before really backing up and listening to the problems that their customer is facing. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that listening component in that conversation? How do you kind of really try to find out what their problem is that they're trying to solve, and then work your product into the conversation?
Yeah. So, and I think David asked this, thanks for the question, David, as well, because I think you asked a question similarly about, like, would you reach out and ask an open-ended questions about their pain? Or would you reach out with a product sales pitch? Here's our product. Does it solve your pain? So I think it first depends on if you have people talking to them or if it's the product. So what's interesting is that if you have a person, I would definitely start with the pain and say, like, what are you looking for? The hard part is most people will just say, does your product do what I want? Yes or no. And they're not going to want to go through a whole discussion. Just sometimes, but if it's a true enough pain, they will. And I think the way I like to start out is typically I like to follow a very simple process where I'm like, what's the vision of what you're trying to accomplish? Or another way to say that is, what does success look like in the next 3 to 6 months? Sometimes it might be less than that. What does success look like in the next 1 to 3 months? It really depends on kind of just to get the overall context. Because if what they're trying to come to you to solve is not actually solvable in that time frame, or maybe it's something that's really not a big enough problem today, it's like, oh, it's not tied to their vision, it's not tied to what they're trying to accomplish, it becomes very hard for them to make a purchasing decision. So it starts out with, like, what does the vision look like? And then I also like to ask, like, what's the inspiration behind what you're trying to do? What are the values in terms of how you guys, how that as a company you operate? And again, it depends on how big of a company you're selling to, smaller, bigger, medium size. It all depends. But understanding the values also helps you understand how they're going to end up making a decision. And then I like to get into, okay, great, what are your big bets to get to that vision of success in the next 3 to 6 months? And as they outline those big bets, if none of those big bets tied to what we're talking about, most likely what I'm going to try to sell them is going to be hard to sell. Because if I can't connect our product to those things, it's not possible. So the trick is that you can't go too long asking these questions without giving something in return. So typically what I like to do is I go through these, I typically set up the discussion, and if it's a person, and say, hey, great, we have about 15 minutes set up, or maybe it's 30. What I like to do is spend just 5 minutes getting a little bit more understanding about your interests, asking you some questions so I can better understand. And then that way, at that point, I can start sharing how I think our product can or can't help. And if at that point it doesn't help, we can stop right then. If it does, if I think it makes sense, we can figure out what the best next path is. And by the end of the next 15 to 30 minutes, we should have a pretty good sense, both of us, if this makes sense to continue to evaluate. And then you kind of get into those questions. And once you get a little bit of understanding of what those pain points are, or what they're trying to do strategically, then your pitch needs to be shaped around that. So how does your product help them achieve those things? And so that's what I would say from a sales perspective. If it's a product driven, not pitch, but like a product driven sale where it's how they interact with your product, you have to think to yourself, okay, people are trying to do that exact thing. How do I make sure with my product I get them to that answer? And that becomes a different type of challenge.
Right. Wow, that's great. And thank you, David, for that question. That was a really good one. I'm curious, Adriana, if you can answer also, like, obviously talking to the customer directly is the best way to get feedback and really understand those pain points, work them into your pitch, etc. But how do you do that when it's not a one-on-one conversation and it might all be happening online, over social media or something like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And if you think about it, what you're trying to better understand is, and hopefully what you understand already is, what are the themes of those pain points that folks feel? Or what is it that they're trying to gain? And if you have those themes and it's online and say on social, on Instagram, hopefully whatever you're posting or whatever, if it's an ad or an image or a short video, you're really speaking to those things so that the people you get coming to you they empathize, they resonate with what you've shared. And as a result of that, you've already basically pre-qualified them in a way into a general idea, or at least they have enough interest that they're willing to talk to someone at that point. So I think from that perspective, it becomes really getting focused on your message and getting really specific and frankly, being very clear. I think one of the challenges I see all the time is with all the companies that I speak to is that oftentimes if people just don't understand what you're going to do, it's not clear because it's like, oh, we can do so much. And oftentimes and this kind of comes back to like identifying your customer, being able to have a more specific view in terms of how you differentiate. Being very specific and narrowing down the focus not only helps your customers because they know what you're to come to you for, but it helps your team. And I think that the key thing is getting that customer insight to help you drive where that focus should be is something that we found to be a recipe of success. Especially, and I'll give you an example of a company that did this well. It's really big, but the idea I think is actually very similar, especially because it's from a small business perspective. You all have the ability to move faster, but Starbucks, for example, has a lot of focus areas. They have a lot of products, but if you look at their app, one of the things that we were working with them, one of the ideas they had was that how do they streamline that customer feedback process? So in the app today, you can click and you can basically upvote and downvote and give recommendations. And what that does is it surfaces to the top, effectively similar to something like Reddit. What are the key things that customers are asking for? We have the same thing. We call it the idea exchange. And it's just a mechanism. And now it doesn't have to be as you grow and scale, this can become more systematized. But I think the idea is what's key here, which is how do you create a way to allow your customers to give you feedback and have each other almost vote on it to be able to get a better sense of what they're looking for.
That's a great example, and a really interesting way to also get that feedback. I'm also curious, so if we're speaking online, right, and you're focusing on key messages to send out, and that's kind of more of the brand awareness phase, right? So there's hardly a person in the business world that hasn't heard of Salesforce, right? But Salesforce Essentials is pretty new. So I'm curious to know, how did Salesforce Essentials create that online presence and brand awareness within the Salesforce brand?
Yeah, Essentials is designed and priced for small businesses. So we're really focused on building awareness with everyone who's on the phone right now. We've done that really through a collection of tactics. Sometimes are some advertising, PR, partnerships, and we're really focused on content marketing as well. And I think the thing is, like, we've still got a ways to go. Salesforce started in 1999 in an apartment in San Francisco, and we sold specifically to originally small businesses. But as we grew and we moved up and focused on the enterprise, that has helped us drive our success and our customer success. But now we got to a point where we realized that we actually are in a unique opportunity to reinvest all the innovation that we've been driving in the enterprise in a way that is designed for the person who has 4 different jobs and is, the CEO, the salesperson, the marketer, the support person, and really design a product for that. Now that shift, while the technology is all Salesforce, while as the companies grow, it's future-proof because you could just upgrade to the other additions of Salesforce. It's something that most people are just not aware of. And so it's something that we are really focused on, is trying to help educate the market that we now have a new solution that's really designed for a person who wears many hats.
That's great. Yeah. And it definitely is like a core component of what all business owners need, right? Is how to manage their customers. I'm curious, do you use any incentives to convert a potential customer? And if you have opinions on benefits and drawbacks of using incentives?
Yeah, it's interesting. So and I'll tie a couple different ideas together. So one, we announced a partnership with MasterCard. And so MasterCard has a small business card, and they're really focused on really changing the game when it comes to how they support small businesses. So from their perspective, they've been historically, all credit card companies has been a race to the bottom in terms of how many points you get. And their new card is really focused on giving solutions to small businesses they might need. And one of them is Essentials. And so we're offering, if you have the card, you get Essentials at an exclusive discount. And so what I'm getting to is like, discounting is a mechanism for it, but it also becomes one of these things where I want people to buy the product not just because oh wow, it's a good deal, because we are a recurring revenue, right? So what that means is if you don't renew effectively, like we've from a business perspective spent money to acquire someone and then lost them, and so we need to get back our investment to acquire them. And so from that perspective, and you can buy month to month or an annual contract, it becomes super important for us to think through the consequences of incentives are that we want to make sure the value is there. Now, having said that, the other hypothesis is that, if we just get them in the door, the product will show them the value. So it just is like it becomes something where you can use something like discounting as an incentive. We also have coaches that we have created this role where if someone in our product wants to talk to a coach who can help them get set up on their fastest path to growth, the coach can help them, give them advice. Sometimes it's setting up the tool. Sometimes it's something that's adjacent to that, like setting up a sale. What are resources to set up a sales process? And those are things that we might direct them to some of our resources online. Maybe it's stuff on Hello Alice, depending on what they're looking for, and kind of coach them through that.
That's great. Yeah, and obviously it's great to convert that lead and gain a new customer, but it can be even more important to keep them, right? Especially with the subscription-based model. What are some of the tactics that Salesforce Essentials uses to retain customers?
Yeah, so what's interesting is like the number one thing that from our perspective we want to do is help make the product so useful that people are coming back every day to use it. And so when I think about that, and I think about in the context of all of your products, I'd ask what are those loops that people come to your product every day to do? What are those 1 or 2 things, the magic moments, the aha moments? I've heard many different companies call it different things, where people go and that really helps them. It really helps them basically change the way they work, and they see that value. And how do you get people to do that as quickly as possible? And I think that's kind of really important to that. And so when I think about our retention is actually mostly about adoption. And how do we make sure we drive someone to adopt? If it becomes a conversation later on about I'm not using this, then it's a harder conversation for everyone, because they didn't see the value at the beginning. They didn't build those habit loops that we want to help drive to help them grow their business. And at the end of the day, we will do whatever we can to help them kind of get back on that growth path and adoption. But what's more important is getting signals as soon as possible so we can help right when the problem happens and not wait till the end to try to keep our customers. And the last thing I'll say is that customer experience, though, is very important. So how do we make sure we can help them the moment they have a problem, that they can talk to us, we can help them, and how do we create that experience in a way that they really find valuable?
Right. So can you speak more to how do you bring people back into the fold if they're not using the product or they're unhappy with the product? Can you speak to some tactics for how to do that?
Yeah. So for example, there's a couple things that we have as offerings to help people. So one is they can always talk to us. And so oftentimes we'll reach out and say, hey, we noticed that, you might not be seeing the value you expected when you signed up. Is there anything we can do to help? So it's not something that simple. We have scaled things, like we have these things called how-to workshops. So we have these workshops that we create we have specialists that basically they're how-tos that are a combination of it's people. If you think about it, we don't have technology problems. We typically have people process problems. We have so much technology in the world today that you can most likely find technologies that solve or help automate things. And so what we find is that what we do our how-tos, we basically show you how to use the technology that people already have, but to solve some other process or problem that they have. So be it contact management, maybe it's just that they have the support and they want to have a better way to have a unified inbox to respond. And we basically have these how-tos to say, get on a call with an expert and they'll walk you through how to actually take that and put it into the product as well so that you can better manage your customers.
Great. So you got into this a little bit, but I'm wondering, how can an early stage founder maintain relationships with their customers as their business grows? So is that hiring? Is it using tools? Is it a mix?
Yeah, so I like to think of that moment as actually one of the growth stalls that a founder might have. What I mean by that is that's the moment when a founder realizes that to continue to grow, they basically have to hire someone else to do the sales, and that's hard because the founder is typically the best salesperson. The passion's there, the vision's there, the curiosity's there, and so at that point, you're basically getting the reason a founder wants to hire a salesperson or people is because that's the point where they realize that, okay, I'm not scalable enough and I need to continue to grow revenue. And so that's why I call it a growth stall. And there's different growth stalls that happen. And what's interesting is that point, it becomes very hard because that's the point where you really are pressure testing. Have you been optimizing just for the outcome of acquiring a customer as a founder, and because of those things that I mentioned, you're able to do it? Or have you created a process that can be followed by someone else that allows for repeatable wins? And so I think that's the first piece of this. And then the second piece, to answer your question about how do you stay in touch with the customers, is even when you start to hire the sales folks, that's where you want to have combination of, if you want to be involved in sales, that's when you'd want to have pipeline reviews and set up these meetings, have a very easy way to understand what deals are in the pipeline, understanding where you can help, because you're still the biggest asset for the team, especially as you're transitioning out of being the predominant salesperson. And so you need to so customer feedback from a sales perspective and understanding what requirements are coming in the door to feed the product is one piece of it. And so the expectation I would typically have is that you're never really removed from sales. You're just helping other people repeat the process that you've developed and then being brought in on the key ones. And that's from a sales perspective. And I think there's plenty of opportunities from asking customers for feedback. What we do oftentimes is someone cancels, the CEO of Essentials, we send an email from them. And if they want to give feedback directly to us as to why they decided to cancel, we'd love to hear it. So we get a sense from there. So it's about creating multiple different touch points.
Got it. And so it depends on which type of product you have, like if it's a physical good or a technology, right? But so at that scaling point, are you also bringing on, customer support, customer experience managers or success managers?
Yeah. And so that's a different growth stall that sometimes is connected to that point where you hire a salesperson, because that's really, when you think about it, it's like I've acquired a customer. Well, I can probably support that customer with everyone that's on our team right now. But there comes a point where it's like, okay, maybe it's 10 customers in, maybe it's 20, it just depends on the products that are being sold and the goods that are being sold. But there becomes a point where, actually, the people who are on the team can't support this. We need to actually have people dedicated to supporting these customers. And that's when it becomes the next piece, which is to really sustain growth. We need to be able to support these customers in a way that we're not doing it today, which means that, one, we typically have to change our process. And two, part of that is we need to hire people. And then what comes after that is, okay, what's the underlying technology to support those folks to be as efficient as possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so bringing in the tools, the people, that, and you said that's a secondary growth stall, you would say, after the first with the salesperson.
Well, no, I think it just depends on where you are at. So for some folks and some products, you will hire a salesperson later on and you've actually acquired a bunch of customers first. It just really depends. I was in Philly earlier this week and I was at an incubator and I talked to two companies who, for them, one happened before the other and vice versa. And it just depends on the product you're selling, where you are at. Sometimes it only ends up being like, okay, we acquired about 5 customers and then we decided that the only way to scale this is getting a salesperson. And then when a salesperson comes in, we start getting way more customers and then we have to figure out how to support the whole experience. Mm-hmm. In other cases, it's the other way around, which is we've actually sold quite a bit without a sales team and we needed to support them. And just the founders all supporting them themselves is just not enough.
Got it. So yeah, it depends where you're at, right?
Yes.
So shifting gears here a little bit, at Alice, we use a few different personas of types of business owners that we serve, that we keep in mind when we're creating new features or marketing campaigns or other parts of the business. I'm wondering, does Salesforce Essentials use customer avatars or personas to check branding and messaging?
Yeah, we absolutely do. I think this is where the most powerful tool we have as we kind of shape the product is talking to our customers and then figuring out the themes of the people who are coming to us. And we typically look at everything we can from demographic information. We think about like where they're coming from, what their stage of growth is, to really be able to identify who they are, what they're looking for, and how we can solve their problem. I think it's really important to do that exercise, at the very least, to understand how you want to focus. Similar to what we talked about earlier on, it's easy to have our product does a lot of things, we can solve for a lot of people, but how do you create that narrow focus to start to get escape velocity in terms of like your customer acquisition and retention, so that you keep acquiring new customers at a rate that allows you to sustain growth.
Got it. Also, on a different note though, what are some differences that might be happening between a B2C company and a B2B company in their sales funnels and in how they talk to customers, or what personas they might have also?
Yeah, well, I think when we talk to B2B and B2C, the ordering of things typically kind of changes a little bit, because when in B2B, most folks that we speak to are talking to the folks they're selling to, and in B2C, it's not the case. And so but the one thing I want to combine the two is that B2B buyers bring their B2C selves to the table when they're trying to buy. People want it to be as easy as possible. People don't want a complicating buying process. And so because of that, we really have to think about like that experience, and the rideshare experience I gave earlier, that's really what's critical. And so when I think about the buying process, the velocity might be different. A B2C process might be very different unless it's a more expensive product. But the experience that underlines them both, it's still a B2C buyer who's buying. And so we have to kind of think about that, which is a big shift in terms of what was the case, 10 years ago.
Right. So just to back up a little bit, can you outline the stages of the sales funnel that you might see in both a B2B or a B2C company?
Sure. So I think the first question is, are people going to buy your product by themselves, or do they need someone to consult them? And I kind of think of that as like, is it a self-evaluation, or is it a consultative sale? Mm-hmm. I kind of view those two as like the start. And then from there, many different things can happen. So if someone's doing it on their own and you're not selling to them, whether it's B2C or B2B, the way I think about it is there's a marketing qualified lead, and then there's a sales qualified lead would be how you think about, that's how you think about it if it's a consultative sale. But if I'm thinking about it from someone who's buying on their own, the marketing lead might come in, but ultimately you basically want to have a product qualified lead in a sense. Like, what is it that if they're going to buy on their own and maybe they're purchasing the goods online, what is it that identifies to us that they're likely to purchase? And if it's a B2B, the same type of thing, like how do we ensure that we have a good sense of whether they're going to buy? Because then we can do nurture campaigns, et cetera, to them to help drive that. If it's a more consultative sale, they're going to look to a salesperson to help that and help kind of guide them. And so from there, we typically look at the marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, and then we go through opportunity stages that go from anywhere from identifying opportunity to negotiation. I think those different stages, my biggest piece of advice there is think about how your customers want to buy. Write it down. As you think about those different steps, think about what the key steps to that is. Almost everything that is going to be a consultative sale, there's going to be some kind of negotiation or a proposal of some sort. And so what I would do is outline all those things and think of every stage as effectively just a probability. So I do this thing, it has this type of a chance to close. If I do this thing, it has this type, and you're not going to get it right, but it's one of these things that you just want to evolve over time. The key is consistency so that you can have a better sense of how the business is doing so you can understand how things are going to close. So ultimately, I would identify those things, write them down, and then track it and be able to have a good sense of how the pipeline's moving and if these are the right steps or if you need to change things. And oftentimes, if you're early on and you don't have anything like this, chances are you have it. You just haven't like formalized it. And I would almost think through just like if you were to talk through how does someone buy from us and you map that out, you'll get your answer.
Got it. So what are some of the key metrics that you would track at each stage of that funnel?
Yeah, so I think it just depends on, again, what type of company you are, who you're selling to. Ultimately, like you're probably going to have different types of volume if you're B2C versus B2B, selling big or small. But if I had to give just a couple examples, I would say that when you think, I would almost orient to the kind of idea that like what's your product market fit and how valuable is it? Because what you can think about is from a consumer product, you know, you need to get a high volume of users. You need to figure out how many people are going to try your product, like coming in the door. You want a high volume unless it's a very high priced product. And so you just have a different way to think about it. But the metrics end up being like how many people are in each of those stages, and then also understanding the likelihood of close. And so that's how I think about outlining it. And the other piece of that is like, how much does it cost to get them there?
Mm-hmm. And how I'm often thinking of it is conversion rates, like at each stage of that funnel. I'm wondering if you have any insight on like what's a normal drop-off rate between a lead and somebody who, you know, starts considering, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example for like SaaS products. So software as a service products, it's typically like 5% is the conversion rate from like free to paid. What I would say is that depending on what industry you're in and what you're looking at, I would basically assess there's probably industry benchmarks out there that you can find. Ultimately, what this comes down to is a cost to acquire. So your conversion rate needs to be high enough that whatever you're paying to get them to come in the door ends up paying out the door well. And so you can so that's just a benchmark I give you for like software as a service. But what I would recommend is actually just looking at the economics of your system that you're putting in place to sell your product and understand, okay, great, how much are we willing to spend and what does the conversion need to look like given how much we're spending $10, we're getting 10 leads, what does the conversion rate need to look like for us to make this actually work?
Right.
And I think there's always going to be some time where you're going to play off of like, okay, I might spend a little bit more to acquire these customers now, but, and over time it'll go down. I think that's normal, but you can look at industry benchmarks and then just look at the economics and look at how you need to improve it over time.
Great. So would you also recommend industry benchmarks for a founder asking how long should they expect a customer to stay in each phase of that sales funnel?
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of brings us back to a comment I made earlier, which is what are the category of product that you're in? Is it pre-existing? Do people already buy this or a version of it? And if they do, look at that. And that can give you a good sense of, are people buying faster or slower? Is it value?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would understand that to better understand how long people should be in each stage. I don't think it depends. Like if in Salesforce's world, for example, if we're selling to an enterprise company, it can be 12 to 18 months. If we're selling to a small business, it's less than a day. It's
Right.
just different. So what I would say is understand who you're selling to, what their buying process looks like, and then make some assumptions around what should you expect is reasonable.
Mm-hmm. And one more on lead marketing. So David asks, there's a lot of sales CRMs for email drip marketing. I'm using Freshsales and I've tried HubSpot and Pipedrive. Is Salesforce Essentials helpful for prospect hunting, not sales selling?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's two pieces to this. So one is what Salesforce Essentials is. So Salesforce Essentials helps you organize all your customer data. You can track your sales process. You can support your customers as well. You got real-time dashboards, and you can run it all on your phone. From a marketing specific perspective, right now we have lightweight marketing. Specifically, we have the ability to track campaigns and do simple mass email. We do have an ecosystem of thousands and thousands of apps that allows folks to use whatever they find most useful, that integrates directly into the product itself and creates one seamless experience. And the way Salesforce serves is basically the golden customer record. And so, for example, Active Campaign is another example of a product that is an integration with us, MailChimp, et cetera. So there's lots of different products. So it depends on what you're looking for. Typically what we see people come to Essentials for is because it does offer the sales, the support, the lightweight marketing, and integrations as well, all in one for $25 a month, so that they can have one platform to do all these things.
Right. That's great. Another question that came in actually over email before this session. So Karen asked, how can I get in front of the person in charge of making decisions when they won't even let me in the front door? We also make phone calls, but no one will return our calls. We've been in business for 20 years and are needing to grow again. I get that people are inundated with freight carriers making sales on them as well, but if someone would just give us a minute of their time, we could prove our business success to them. So do you have any, thoughts on how you can get in front of people when they're not receptive to it?
Yeah, so I'd say the first question is that I would ask myself, is it worth it to invest in getting in front of this specific potential prospect? And let's assume the answer is yes, because if the answer is no and there's other folks you can prioritize time, that's one way to solve that. But let's say the answer is no, this is like the perfect golden account that we really want to land. So then what I would think about is sit down with the marketing team and understand how do we get into it? I would try tactics like read up on where they are from a company perspective. What are their goals? Are they in the news? Is there anything that's going on that's relevant that we can connect to? Similar to what I mentioned, ideally you could just ask them what their vision is, but if you can't get there. The other piece is that I also never like to underestimate the power of a mailer. The reality is that today, receiving mail seems old school, but it's also in a way a differentiator. And so be it sending a note and then following up on that, oftentimes gives the sales team an opportunity to have a reason to call. That's not just I'm calling to try to sell you. And then the other option is make sure that you go far and wide within the account and start calling different folks and just see who and where you might be able to not get to the decision maker, but just go far and wide and try to figure out, get a lay of the land. Because ultimately what it comes down to is if you can go far and wide and get a lay of the land and come back to the decision maker with talk to your team, here's some insights we've gathered, here's what we'd recommend as next steps, would you be open to a conversation? Mm-hmm. Now all of a sudden you have talked to the team, you have context, you believe it's not going to be a waste of their time, and that could be another way to get into the account.
Those are all great tactics. And if anyone does have more questions, feel free to keep dropping those into the chat or the Q&A.
The last thing I'll just say on that too is also your team probably has a lot of ideas too. So sometimes it may make sense just to create a war room and do a 1 hour where you try to outline the entire account. What is their goals? What are they trying to achieve? Why do we think that we are different and we can help them? And kind of get the team together and huddle for like 30 minutes and work through it.
That's a great idea. And actually speaking on that team perspective, and I know we talked about this a little bit earlier with hiring sales managers and customer success managers. But so how, what are some of the best practices for building out an effective sales and customer success team, particularly for those scaling quickly?
Yeah, hiring is so important. And I'd say it's one of the most important things you can do. And so when I think about hiring a sales person, it's hard. But the big thing that everyone's drawn to is, so there's two things I'll say. One is everyone's drawn to that like A+ player, right? That is just like the born to be a salesperson. And the problem with that is that A+ player a lot of the time cannot tell you what they do to sell. And say you have a new idea of how we could sell the product better, they could make it work just because they are born to be a salesperson. And when it comes to scaling, it's all about creating a repeatable process that you can repeat over and over and over again. And so finding the person who is able to do that is going to give you a strategic advantage, not just on the first hire, but the third and fourth and fifth, because they'll be able to create a playbook, not a playbook that's not repeatable. The second piece of this is that oftentimes I was asked this question on Tuesday in Philly, which was, should we be hiring someone who is a career salesperson, or if this was a light bulb company, and should we be hiring someone that is like, if we want to sell into the hotel industry, should we be hiring someone that comes from that industry and understands that industry well? And it's an interesting question. My perspective is that I would hire someone from the industry themselves who understands how the buying process works, understands when the buying process happens, who are the right people to talk to, maybe already has a network, and then basically rely on the founder to teach them either how to sell the product, or the founder can get involved too until they figure out a little bit more about the sales piece, and then start hiring a bunch of salespeople who are really good at repeating process. And that is two things I would recommend in terms of how I think about that problem.
That's amazing. I love that example too of really just in the weeds, who should I hire right now? That's definitely a question that we get a lot at Alice. And that's a really great answer. Shifting gears a little bit here, partnerships are obviously a great way to grow sales sometimes. What types of partnerships might a solo entrepreneur be able to leverage to grow their customer base? And then a secondary follow-up would be, how can they make those connections to build those relationships?
Yeah, so partnerships are a big lever for growth. And when I think about growth stalls, the instant thing is there's no silver bullet. And so you try to think about how are the different ways that you can actually continue to grow the business. From a partnership perspective, the way my biz dev team and the way we think about it is, one, there's going to be partnerships that are about enhancing the product. And so what do those look like, and how do we enhance the product? And that might be something like I mentioned before, integrations in an app store. For other folks, it might be just adjacencies of complementary products that would make sense. And so that is one piece of the pie. So what are the partnerships that will allow us to create greater value to our customers because our product and something else is put together? So that's one category. The second category is, who are people who are shared customers who each partner doesn't have a solution for, that if we come together, we now have access to their customer base, and they have access to ours, and it allows us to grow together. I think that is almost like a referral type of partnership where you create it provides nice synergies because the same people we're selling to, we just have very different needs, and the products may not be integrated, but it just makes sense because we're talking to the same buyer. And so when we look at those two things, those are two big levers for growth that if we can execute correctly, allows us to get incremental leads. right? These are ways to get us incremental leads, and then or create bigger stickiness in our product. And that's because things all work nicely together with everything that you already have, be it, be it something in your personal life, or be it, a business to business type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And can you speak to a little bit, like how does Salesforce Essentials, for example, build a relationship with a potential partner? What is that process like?
Yeah, so it's similar to a sales process, but we start out with an understanding of what is our vision and what we're trying to accomplish. Then what are the things that would allow us to make that vision a reality, and specifically helping our customers grow. And so when we think about that, and we started out with like understanding who are the people in who are the companies that we'd want to partner with that allows us to do this, that really are part of our mission and vision to really help small businesses grow and help build a community and help small businesses connect to one another and grow their businesses. But also, how do we think about from a product offering or from a value? Because maybe the products are not at all connected, but maybe there's just value in the fact that, one of the number one challenges is there's never enough time in the day. Everyone's doing 4 jobs. And so as a result of that, like, how do we get to the point where they don't have to go to multiple people for answers? We can give them the answers. And so we come up with a list that way, and we think about, from a product perspective, what are the things that customers are asking for about integrations and because they want to run their business from one app with one customer record. And then at the same time, we think about, okay, where are there opportunities to get to other customers? And so we basically identify the accounts. Once we identify, and by accounts, I mean the business we want to partner with. From there, we think about what is the message we want to go to, and then we reach out to them and kind of start a sales process where we most of the time just reach out to them cold and say, hey, this is what we think. We think there's a good opportunity. Would you be open for a discussion? And then there's also one other piece of that, which is we also do get inbound inquiries.
Mm-hmm. As well. Great. I'd like to chat a little bit about customer expectations. So these days, it seems like people just want more and more out of every product they're using. And those needs with the products change quite frequently. So how do you keep up with that? And do you have any tips or tricks to share about really keeping up with customer expectations?
Yeah. So, I think that the customer expectations are growing just rapidly as you mentioned. And one of the things that you can do to grow with it is, as we mentioned, making sure you have a tight feedback loop from those customers. And this is the question I ask you yourselves and your teams, how do we ensure that we are listening to our customers to understand how we might evolve? Because the example is, what if you have the best product, but the experience of buying is not what people want? Then people won't buy it. And so if their buying is too hard or not the way you'd like, you need to evolve that. And so my advice is that listen to your customers, find repeatable process to capture that, be it an in-app feedback, maybe it's after a certain amount of time you ask for feedback, maybe it's while you're on the call, you make sure that there's a way to, with customers, there's a way to document it. I think there's a lot of different tactics to do that. And I think but the key thing is making it a priority to continue to capture that. The other thing is understand, like, what is the experience you actually want? Oftentimes I'll talk to customers of ours, and the experience that I'm shared with is one level deep. It's just, I just want to have a good experience. What does that look like? What does it look like? And so if you can't paint that experience and then march toward it and then get feedback along the way, because you won't get it right the first time.
That's great. Is there also any tips that you would have for how many customers need to be saying the same thing before you actually change that in the product? Is there kind of like a mass, I guess, a needed mass before a product change is maybe required?
There's ways to kind of assess that. So like a good example is oftentimes when you see in software, I'll give you an example as an analogy. oftentimes what you'll see is you'll see that there's people that say, oh, you want something, request now, or I'm interested in it, sign up for updates. And it might not just be in software, it could be in B2C as well, where people just say like, oh, sign up for updates and we'll let you know. It could be for a TV show, like, you want us to let you know the latest updates. But really what that is just a feedback capture to say like, okay, let's count how many people actually are interested in this and how much demand there is for this. And then what it becomes a question of is that, one, it can be a question of the economics of it, which is, do I have enough demand that if I created this extension of our product or created a net new product and sold it, that the investment we think we'll see? Or the other is like, maybe this will actually help retain customers and have them coming back to us for things. And so I would depends on how big you are and how many customers you have. If you have one customer and it's the only person giving you feedback, I'd probably just ask folks who aren't customers what they think. If you have 10 and half of them are asking it, but I would really use them to help drive your roadmap.
Mm-hmm. How do you reconcile if your customers are saying opposite things?
So if customers are saying the opposite things, I would trust your team to basically talk to them and assess what it is that we like. Your team probably have a hypothesis, or you do, on what you think is where we need to go. And so what I would say is, if you have two people opposing, then I would get a couple more pieces of feedback and eventually then put something together and see how they'll react to it.
Mm-hmm. Great. And we've got a question that came in from April Byers. She asks, we currently use Intercom once a customer is in our system. Our biggest issue is leads coming to us. Can Salesforce Essentials be beneficial at this point in our business?
Thank you, April, for the question. Yeah, so with Salesforce Essentials, you can quickly and easily set up like a web to lead form is what we call it. So just imagine there's a form on your website where if they fill it out, it'll come in and you can organize those leads. You can organize them many different ways, depending on what you ask from the form. You can prioritize those. You can assign them to different people. And so from a simple way of processing demand, which is how I'm reading your question, you can process that demand and organize them and even manage them into a deal if it makes sense to become a deal. And so this is one of the key use cases we see. We typically see 3 use cases, which is one, just having a golden record of your contacts and contact management. The second is having inbound lead flow and being able to manage that, or even if it's outbound, but like having a list of leads and managing those. And then the third is typically managing inbound support questions and having a shared, effectively, inbox to manage all of inbound support if people are emailing you with questions, and having a way to automate some of the processes to answer those questions quickly.
Great. I do wonder, do you have kind of any tips for how April might be able to improve how many leads are coming into her company right now?
Yeah, so I think the question I'd have for you, April, is if you have too much right now, you're just trying to manage it, that would be the first thing I would try to do, is just get a hold of it to understand like which are the good leads. So the biggest challenge before I'd go invest is identify what are the leads sources that are driving the interest. So if you have leads coming from the website, or you have it from Google search, or you have it from different places, I'd understand like, okay, what are the conversion rates of those leads? And I think it sounds like that's the first step. Using a system to track that will help you understand, so that then you can say, can we go do more of that? Eventually with those things, we'll tap, okay, so thank you for sharing, you're not getting enough leads. So what I would do is identify which are the best leads and the best investments. And then from there, I would go in and say, great, let's try to do more of that. And that would be the first step. And then the second step of that is, of the leads you've already gotten, how do you make sure that you don't buy the lead twice? And what I mean by that is, you've done something to get them to show up, and let's say you weren't able to get a hold of them. How do you create, the ability to just email them down the road and see if there's more interest, or service them back up, or at the very least understand like, okay, today someone filled out a form, and then and we couldn't get a hold of them. 2 months later, that person came back in the door, and I can see them because I've been tracking it, and they came back in the door, and now they searched for something. So now I know that the likelihood there's something there is pretty high. So I think I would want the sales team or whoever's following up on the leads to really like call them, maybe 5 emails, 5 calls, or whatever is your process, because they've now shown multiple interest points.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great advice. We're at the top of the hour here, so I'd love to close on what's one piece of essential business advice you can offer to help small businesses attract or retain customers? If you were to boil down everything.
What's one piece of advice? Well, I think the main thing I would say is that as you think about the experience you want to create for your customers, ensure that you have a way to understand whether you're delivering that experience. So if you're talking about attracting or retaining customers, are you able to understand if you have enough leads or don't have enough leads, and which are the good leads? Do you have a way to understand, and because what that means is it's not just about your business, there's an impact to the customer there. Because if you're able to be smarter about who you talk to and what you talk to them about and understanding what they've done, you're going to be able to provide more value to them and create a better experience. And so what I would say that would be the number one thing is really think through what that experience looks like and understand that it's not really a technology problem. It's a people and process problem that then the technology needs to support.
Great, great. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. Thank you so much, Adrian, for these really, really insightful answers to these questions. For everyone who joined us today, you will be able to get a copy of this recording at helloalice.com, and we'll be emailing you about that. And if you'd like to dive more into customer acquisition, we have a free guide on Alice that takes you step by step through the different processes that are part of that. So definitely check that out. It's at helloalice.com. And thank you so much, Adrian and Salesforce, for joining us today and really making this a great session.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for the questions. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.